Right, I'm just setting this up and hopefully we'll get started if this decides to work. Okay, yeah, it's working. Right, so we're here, and I actually wasn't really sure what to. I considered posting something or making a stream when the actual results came in, but the election itself on Tuesday, I didn't touch my phone, didn't look at anything to do with the politics of the election, didn't think about it whatsoever. Didn't want to think about any of it, to be honest. I thought, ultimately, it's in America, I'm in Britain. We're going to find out eventually, and that'll be that. And so on the day itself, didn't touch my phone. I went running, had work, had university stuff. And so I didn't look at anything to do with the election until the next morning, Wednesday morning, at which point Harris was visibly on the way to a defeat. Trump was leading and eventually winning the swing states, and all was confirmed. And the actual feeling when I saw it was quite of despondency. Not gonna lie, it was quite a sinking feeling. It wasn't a very nice, feeling. But it was something that I had anticipated for a while. I sort of, with any election, I think, since I've become an adult, there's just a sense of dread that comes with it, right? Like there's always a chance that a fascist is going to have success. There's always a potential danger that's there. But at the same time, when you read the headline, Trump wins, when you see the electoral map, when you know that there's going to be a fascist in the White House in charge of the leading nation of the Western world, certainly in terms of economics, but whatever you think of it, America is that powerhouse in Western politics, Western thoughts. It's a bad feeling. It's not nice. It's a really unpleasant situation to think about. And I suppose for all the for everything we think about it, for millions of people, myself included, there is just a drag in knowing that these people are in power or going to be in power in a few months' time. But as well as that despondency, I found myself feeling quite cross, quite angry, quite frustrated at some of the responses to the election. Because naturally, when bad things happen, there's that instinctive you lash out, right? Like you're upset, you're feeling emotional, and so when you feel those things, you tend to splurge out all the things you're thinking. And so this naturally is going to be the case when an event of this magnitude happens. Trump wins, and there's naturally going to be some criticism of the other party, the Democrats, and a lot of it is obviously justified. Absolutely, like there's no mistake, right? Like I think this is the latest example of why centrist, centre-right, liberal politics aren't enough to really do much of anything against. They're not gonna hold out in the long. They're not a long-term sustainable idea. But I actually found more of my anger, more of my frustration was still towards the far right, towards the Republican Party, because there's so much has been said recently, just about how this party have won voters and how they're capturing young people and how they're gaining ground and all this just obvious stuff that's going to help them, stuff that they want to hear, right? We're popular and everyone really secretly supports Trump, and I find myself just so fed up of all of it, so bored of that narrative. But it was getting me really cross. I was reading, because I wasn't posting. I didn't post any. I'm trying to remove myself from Twitter more and more. Like it's such a cesspit. But even on other sites that I use, like there's so many things that have been posted and said on mainstream television coverage, in articles that you can read, like websites and social media, left wing and centrist. And I don't really look at right wing media, but it makes enough of a presence in your life to be felt and heard. So, you know, that is inevitably seen as well. But you see all this, you see all these narratives, and you see all this stuff that's been said. And so much of it is crap. So much of it is just utter rubbish. Like, and I think one of the first things that I'm actually thinking as well is when people say, Republicans won the election, they've won America, they've got the most voters. It's just like not quite right, because while of course in this election they've got more votes than the Democrats, to center all of take the idea of American political beliefs and ideas and what society is wanted to be, and center that, use your metric for measuring that on an election in America. First past the post, electoral college, support crappy, awful politicians, vote in these terribly gerrymandered elections where you've got one voting station, like in a whole city neighborhood, vote at this specific day, at this specific time, not voting for policy, not voting for like how you want society to be, vote on our terms, on political terms, all here, and focus it on that. And you look at that, and I'm going to share my screen quickly just to illustrate what I'm sort of getting at here. Like, what have we got here? 73 million votes for Trump. Okay, cool. How many people live in America? 330 million or something. So it's not the 50% that's written here, really. It's not even a quarter of that. Like, the idea that there's like an overall support for Trump is just not true. Like, it isn't. Like, mathematically, it isn't true. And that's even before you ignore the fact that some of the people who voted for, they didn't even know what was going to be going on. Like, of course, there's those who 100% want, Project 2025. They want the far-right vision for society. They want their handmaiden's tale. They want all that to happen. But there's a lot of people who watched it and essentially, don't have a clue. They don't know what's going on. They don't have an idea of what they want to see in society, right? And so because of that, like, I feel as though the idea that like we're just in some lost generation where that there's just overall support for fascism, like, it's just not. Of course, there's a lot of support for it, but it's not like it's some like quagmire. It's not like we're not in some like Nazi German scenario where the whole society's fallen to the far right. Like, it's not. It's a coerced and managed and clearly co-opted vision of society that we channel our politics through bad election maps, like the one on the screen at the moment, is essentially an indictment of the capitalist management of society. The fact that our democracy is managed and coerced through capitalist systems is the reason we have bad elections like this. Like, even though we know all the things about the Democrat Party, they're liberal, they don't have the critique of society, they don't believe in doing the radically left-wing or even remotely left-wing things that would help society and help people in society more, even though they subscribe to the same right-wing free market ideas, even though they're complicit in genocides and in so many awful actions, they ultimately, they're not the reason really that this has happened. Like, for as crap and awful as they are, ultimately, if you want to be in a capitalist society and win elections and have this power, like, you got to be right wing, and here's Trump and here's the far right, and they push society further right through their mass media control. Let's not forget this campaign from Trump. He's got literally social media sites bought for him. Elon Musk is in his cabinet. He's going to be, he's making calls to Ukraine, and he's got his technology ingrained into various US infrastructure, right? And here he is, best friends with Trump now, apparently, like right at the core of the administration. How many other billionaire? Jeff Bezos, literally like telling a magazine, a newspaper, Washington Post, telling them to not endorse the Democrats, telling them you're going to be put for Trump. You're going to basically do what we need to stop the Democrats from winning, so that our capital, our resources are protected further. And lo and behold, now he's off endorsing Trump now that the election's been won by them. How much this is another really irritating thing. It's independent media, that's gone for Trump. The independents have gone for Trump. Well, no, they haven't. You're talking about right-wing content creators, right-wing media, funded by billionaires, funded by extremely wealthy sources that claim to be independent because they're not a traditional magazine. You can't buy a newspaper from the local shop with their name on it. Just because they make YouTube videos and because they have a Twitter account, that somehow means they've got a neutral, independent opinion. No, they're right wing. Like, just because the internet was once seen as an alternative to mainstream news, it doesn't mean it's not subject to the same societal forces. Like, the right-wing forces in society interact with everything. We live in a free market capitalist society, and so those same market forces that buy a news channel are also going to buy things on the internet. They're going to put their money and resources onto the internet. And so the idea, like, there's some, I keep reading, it's so frustrating. The idea that young people, young, like, as though there's just like a set thing in society, right? People my age, Gen Z, that they've just gone for Trump. And, like, firstly, that's not actually even true, right? Because statistically, more young people voted for the Democrats, so it's not even correct. But secondly, it ignores the fact that most young people did not vote, right? Like, most people didn't vote in this. It's not like as though there's some radical far right like belief widely held against young people. It's a vocal and loud subset of people engaging with part of the media, which is online and what is typically seen as youthful, YouTube and stuff, alongside all the other parts of society infected by the far right. And because they are loud and because they have like big presence on the internet, they seem much, much larger than they are. More people probably did not vote, did not engage with politics this time. A lot of people did and voted Democrat. More young people voted Democrat, just a lower proportion in the actual voting statistics than previously. That's not like Hitler Youth, indoctrination. That's the same like right-wing forces in society that have always existed. Let's not forget as well, Trump's vote count isn't like some, suddenly he's gained 50 million voters and America's now like the Trump ideology. Like, essentially, this election has been lost by the Democrats because they lost voters. People did not vote for them. And why is that? Ultimately, in a capitalist society, there's only so long you can push neoliberalism and corporate policies and gesturing towards equality and justice before things, you can't motivate people. You can't get that same enthusiasm for it. In the same breath that Biden was able to win this election through that momentum, if you lose it, then you're going to be faced with a serious problem. It's just the optics feel so bad because, firstly, the electoral college makes it seem so much worse than it is, right? You get a map like, I'll show it on the screen again, just so you can see what I'm seeing. A map like this, right, where you've got just a sea of red, little pockets of blue. You've got big number in bold here. It's going to be probably if Nevada and Arizona go to him, going above 300. It looks bad, right? But the real truth is here, which is not that far apart. I mean, really, this is a toss of a coin, if we're really being honest. The truth is in the fact that if I quickly, can I show the population of America on here? Yeah, yes, I can. So let's stop the screen. Let's have a look at what Google is telling us. It's a population, 335 million people. So let's do some quick maths. 69 million, 73 million, that is 142 million people voting. That's less than half. That's 200 million plus people not voting. And yes, some of them are kids, but let's be honest. People who are 17 and 16, should be getting voting rights, right? The fact that all these people cannot vote, many of whom are disenfranchised, many of whom could not make it to the ballot box, many of whom would still care about elections and do not want Trump there, but for whatever reason have not made it to the ballot box. There's clearly something a bit wrong with this electoral process. Let's not also forget as well that the direction people want society to go overwhelmingly is one that favors the working person, favors equality and justice, favors the fact that people want to be able to exist in society. They don't want Project 2025. That had to be taken out of Trump's messaging because it was toxic to the marketing, toxic to their movement. The issue is that Democrats were not able, people are not even Democrats, people did not vote for Democrats enough in certain states, essentially is why this election is lost. A few states swung a certain way, and that swung things from Harris to Trump, from Democrats to Republicans. That isn't a fascist dominance. The fact that it is going to be a fascist situation after that, the fascists are going to have control of government, is unfortunately a statement on how poor American democracy really is, right? Like, even Danny's right, neoliberalism isn't that changed. I've just seen a few comments, right? This is absolutely true, right? It's a crap bunk ideology. It's not motivating. You're telling people how great democracy is when the democracy you have is a failing capitalist one. Is not a good thing to do. But even with that truth, even with that at core, ultimately the fascist movement was not like, that's not like something that just suddenly convinced tons of people. The same people were being convinced, the same like right-wing presence in society, in a dying capitalist society, right? There's always going to be that fascist threat. But at the same time, like, the presence of the fact that it's just like hard to actually go and vote itself is a deterrent, is what makes it easier. Republicans for years, right-wing parties for years, have deliberately made it easier for their voters to vote. In their nasty little like enclaves where they're like active like neo-Nazi kinds of stuff, they'll have a bus taking you to the ballot box. It's nice, it's funded, it's nice, it's easy to get to. Meanwhile, in your proper urban areas where the Democrat voters are, they'll have like one voting station for millions of people. Like a voting station with queues going around the block, where you're not allowed to sell people water and food, where you're queuing up in the cold, because let's not forget it's November, right? Like, it's not nice. It's not nice to stand around in the cold waiting to vote. All these things against you, like crappy, awful, gerrymandered, like BS districts, and you put your votes in through that, and you hope you get your votes to go a certain way. Republicans don't have that issue to the same extent, because they are in control of many of the processes to be able to get this in place. It's an easier task for them to win. Let's not forget as well the processes we've had to fight to actually get to this point in the first place. The powers in society, the right-wing organization of society, the capitalist class, the ruling class, the powers in society don't want to lose their power. And so every time there's a choice between, admittedly, a choice between right-wing and more right-wing, but a choice between going a bit left and going a bit right, even just a little bit, they always want to preserve the right. They always want to keep things going right. And so, to an extent, that any Democrat has ever won an election is a miracle. That anyone who is not the most right-wing option is not able to, but anyone who's the most right-wing option can win sometimes is a miracle, right? The democracies we have, while still a democracy, is so mismanaged and so co-opted and distorted and contorted that it's a miracle that we're even able to get to this point, right? Whereas where there's no like left, forget left wing. There's no less right wing option really for people to fall back on if we're really thinking about it. Like, the fact that you can, like, the people who use social media, the social media platforms get bought by people who are billionaires who want a right-wing government, a more right-wing government. News coverage is bought by right-wing billionaires, and they said billionaires make it so that you don't hear Project 2025 coverage. You don't see the criticism of Trump's policies and what Trump says and does. Instead, you get BS discussions about nothing issues. It's ridiculous. There's no discussion about the voter suppression that happened prior to this election. We have the gerrymandering, the voter ID, all the things in place to make it harder for people to actually express their democratic will. If you put things in place, it would be easier, right? Like, it would be so much easier. And it's obvious. It's so obvious that this is something that is always on a threat in these societies, in this stagnated, bad democracy. And yet here we are with the same tired pundits. Make it like the fact that the conversation is always focusing on what can the left do better, and be it the Democrat Party, absolutely they should be criticized for many things. But for me, the bigger point has to be the right-wing force at play, right? Like, No one talks about the fact that there is something fundamentally wrong with American democracy, with American elections. Now, I think there is an important thing to say about the Democrats here as well, right? Like, of course, I think yes, Venusi and Teapot, like, of course, they will be quite a pain. I've not looked, don't want to look. However, so the point you made about that, which we'll come on to, right-wing people have been, obviously quite celebratory, and that's another thing to come on to, right? Right-wing people, in the wake of a victory for their preferred candidate, are going to be awful. They're going to celebrate, they're going to be all of the, laugh at the left, let's laugh at, like, anyone they perceive as being their enemy, right? So that includes, when we say the left, they mean anyone who's to their left, which is literally everyone from milquetoast liberals, like in the Democrat Party, to radically left-wing people, right? And so because of that, you get all this asinine garbage just thrown out across the whole political spectrum, like internet, basically. I'm going to now switch to The Guardian quickly. We're going to have a look at some of the nonsense I've been reading, like some of it just utter nonsense. I mean, this writer, Jonathan Freedland, isn't exactly, like, I wouldn't say I'm a fan of Jonathan's, but, he's just put out some generic liberal, like, Trump's going to be bad, pretty uncontroversial, pretty accurate, and we're there. And then you look at some of the stuff here in this section, and let me try and find it. Look at this comment I saw earlier, and it's absolute garbage. I really hope that the left everywhere will take away the right lesson from this latest defeat. Identity politics is done. No one's buying it anymore. So in that sentence, there are so many assumptions and deliberate changing of definitions and things which are just absolute tripe. But it's something which packages in to just lots and lots of rubbish, right? So firstly, the left. What's left-wing about Democrats, other than that to the left of the Republican Party? Left-wing ideas that break down inequality and injustice in society, right? They aren't capitalist ones. They aren't like free market ideas, right? They don't believe in the same things. So the left everywhere here is just a misnomer. It's a mistruth. It's not anything substantive. And then we come away from the right lesson, which is quite ironically chosen because they essentially mean a right-wing lesson. The things they're talking about when we talk about identity politics are not, they're not talking about anything serious. What they want essentially is to never talk about any form of systemic discrimination again. They want you to stop thinking sociologically, stop thinking analytically, just accept that we live in some free market post-truth where everyone's just, a consumer with no social reality imposed upon that. Because they know, right-wing people like this know fundamentally that their system is those things. They know there's something not right about black areas with lots of black people who don't vote Republican being given poor conditions to vote in. They know about mass incarceration. They know about police racism. They know about all the things in society. The blatant sexism throughout the Republican campaign. The fact that abortion is far a right people want in society, and yet a party that has won the election is planning to destroy it. There's no democracy there. That's not democratic. That's not something that's a losing idea. This is garbage. There was never any evidence for any structural or systemic bias favoring straight white men. Well, it's just crap, isn't it? The things they accept as evidence are, hearsay, right? Like, but you would never be able to show this person the presence that patriarchal norms or systemic racism have, because they would never accept it. They don't listen. They aren't interested in actually listening to the things that are happening and the accounts and all of the things there. Essentially, this is just a statement they believe in the moment to make this case. The lived experience of a tiny number of vocal activists is not evidence. Well, this is another point, isn't it? When you categorize all that tiny number, so they ignore the wider element of people in society, the fact that society is racialized and exists along gendered lines, and that we try and break down these unjust structures and hierarchies, they ignore that. They categorize it as vocal activists because it constructs an image in your mind of like an angry, over-involved person, and not just the average person trying to get by. Like, ultimately, anyone can be categorized as activist, because if you speak out against a societal injustice, you are fulfilling this image in their mind. And again, they dismiss the evidence. The vast majority of people simply don't recognize the vision of various demographics. In the same way they downplay people they dislike, vast majority is just not the case. We saw earlier, if they're meaning by vast majority Trump supporters, or people, not even that, people who voted Trump, that A, ignores the fact that they would still consider things like racism and sexism to be a thing to some varying degree, and B, that they can't count the masses wrong. There is still most people in society believing in these things. There's not widespread support for fascism. The fact that you can win fascist control without getting that majority support, legitimately through an actual democracy, isn't a support for this argument. Privilege, power, better representation. Like what they do here as well is they take the Democrat. They take the fact the Democrats aren't able to fix capitalism, and they use that to critique the fact that some Democrats will say racism is bad or sexism is bad and present that as though it's some bad thing, right? Like, it's garbage. Now, thankfully, it's The Guardian, so this person here has responded to it, and it's got more likes and stuff. But the fact it's this, the fact that right-wing people have converged on this post, right, and liked it so much, and that this sort of stuff is just so incessant, because ultimately there's tons and tons of right-wing people in society right now who are feeling really proud and pleased, and they're just putting themselves out and shoving all this stuff into everyone's face, and they're just not pleasant to be around at the moment, right? But this, especially an account like this, right? Sacks from Baker Street, just some twit with no stakes in the game. They've made their shitty little account, and now they're here doing that. Like, it's just garbage. What do you scroll down with, right? Like, it's just most of the comments are actually okay-ish here, right? Like, but at the same time, it's also frustrating too, because obviously when you're on a site like The Guardian, there's a lot of, it's a good news source. It's better by far than right-wing sources, but it is still a liberal site. So when you look at some of the stuff you'll see here, like ultimately these authors and writers can't quite, idealize what they need to. They can't quite visualize the problem at core. And so because of that, they get trapped into, we've got to understand the far right, and we've got to work with them, and we've got to report on all this stuff Trump says with no serious pushback. And there's some, of course, because they are still a decent-ish source for news, and they are still trying to oppose him, and they are still trying to be, favor democracy and stuff. But what they forget is that democracy didn't come through liberalism. It came through left-wing action. It came through breaking and going against directly the far right in ways that were unable to be palatable to a market. Striking, protesting, civil disobedience, uncivil disobedience, so many things in society which were once considered, and still considered, completely against the societal norms. That's what won us our labor rights, our civil rights, everything we essentially take for granted now in society, or some people do. Yeah. And because they can't say what needs to be said fully. They can't acknowledge how broken society is because of these things. And so because of that, they're stuck. They're not able to really get onto the true elements of it. What have we got? I'm not sure what's annoying. Liberals proving leftists right when we say scratch a liberal and a fascist bleeds, or anti-SJWs being insufferable right now. Well, it's definitely the anti-SJWs. I mean, I think the other thing, one of the things that frustrates me too, is that whilst liberals, like a liberal view of the world, like because of liberal and left-wing being synonymous means that people who have like general decency and ideas about society that are, in favor of democratic norms often get put under the same like group, right? So liberal is a standing term for left wing in America and in much of the West because, firstly, our parties are either liberal or conservative, and both obviously free market capitalist, but also because lots of people don't have the vocabulary to sort of express themselves outside of this dichotomy, and so liberal just gets to be the term for anyone who doesn't watch Fox News and use the Daily Mail and actually wants to try and do something about poverty and stuff, right? So there's absolutely frustration to be had at the liberals, and 100% the Democrat higher ups need like in sacking and sent off to court, some of them, to answer for their involvement with Israel and the atrocities happening there, right? But at the same time, my annoyance will never be more towards Kamala Harris than it will be towards a fascist like Donald Trump, right? Like there's no... The people who are in society right now making things hell, because ultimately, for as rubbish as the Democrats are, it's an undoubtable truth that had they won, society or America would be in a better state than it will be, when Trump gets into power again. That's just the truth. Like, for as bad as things get, it's always better to be more left-wing than right-wing. And liberals and their parties are more left-wing, more believing in democratic norms and in science and in rationale and in like justice than right-wing parties. And yes, they're complicit and they're rubbish and they're crap, but I can never, like, for as irritating as it is, looking at the Democrat Party and looking at all the stuff that goes on, I'm never going to find hatred for them in the same way that, that I oppose the far right. I want liberals to realize that their faith in a capitalist system, or rather their lack of criticism, their ignorance of the societal pressures and biases and injustices that have shaped the capitalist system and made it into what it is today, and the fundamental flaws in capitalism, that their ignorance of those things is bad. But they still... I can cooperate and exist in a society with people who are liberal. Fascists want us dead. They don't want left-wing people. They don't want black people. There's no healthy discourse. And yes, of course, liberals are pushed further right, but they get moved right. Of course, you look at how Democrats spoke about many issues and how some Democrats, after this election defeat, you have the liberal reaction to understand, like I said a minute ago, they try and understand the right and they try and make themselves palatable to open fascists. So let's work with Trump. Let's embrace their ideas. And maybe they were right about trans issues. And maybe we got to stop talking about anything remotely critical, like that idiot in the comments was trying to say a minute ago. Right. Of course, there's going to be some people there, but there's also millions of people who would call themselves liberals and perhaps don't have the fierce critique that we need them to have yet, who still, belong to these marginalized groups and still have belief in society being decent and people having like livable lives, who are gutted. And to rub it in their faces and say, well, you're wrong, you should listen to us. Like, to me, that's not... like, as frustrating as they can be, and as frustrating as that is for them to be, in this position, like ultimately they're part of a society, right? Like they're not fascists, And outside of the Democrat, like the Democrat higher ups, like you Kamala Harris and Joe Biden, like other than that, they should be off to the Hague explaining their war crimes for actions in Gaza, like. They are the ones that deserve ire to some degree, because they ultimately, Biden should have done more in government with his administration to sort out America. But this is, again, a wider problem in society than just Joe Biden. Any Democrat would have struggled. Anyone in office in our current capitalist system would have struggled, because being a decent person, being a politician that cares for people, is extremely hard in a system built to make money and protect power and be right-wing. So when you try and put things in place to make things fairer, you're met with extreme resistance from right-wing media, right-wing social media, right-wing people in politics, the Supreme Court. Every institution basically is set up to stop things from being fairer, right? Like every, the amount of stuff that the Republicans blocked and stopped, and then ran advertisements saying that, the Democrats are at fault for making your life crap. It's for us, it's hard to operate against them. Like even if you're a milquetoast liberal like Biden and all this lot, like when you're trying to do good things, you get blocked and stopped. Now, absolutely, they should be like, the lesson is don't play nice with Republicans, basically, and for the next forever, basically, until the end of time. Right-wing people have got to be opposed for, and I don't mean fight fight in every sense of the word is what I'll say. So, oppose with force is the best way of putting it, I suppose. Like, you've got to be able to block and stop them in any way possible, and that's going to take a lot of different forms. Any form is good, but it's terrible to me that we aim all our ire at people who did do something, who did try stuff. That it wasn't enough, that it should have been more, is absolutely true. But at the same time, the ire should always be at its fiercest when aimed at the fascists, at the far right, and people who ultimately had the direct consequences, right? Like, because ultimately, when those Republican senators and representatives and the president and all his crew and cabinet show up, because it is a crew, it's not a proper political party. It's not. They're not actual scientists and policy experts. They're charlatans, billionaires, media men, con men, crooks, just absolute scum, basically, just coming in, and they're going to loot every public asset. They're going to make as much money as they can. They're going to advance their far right conservative vision for social life, and it's going to be horrible, and it's going to be hell, right? It's garbage. It's utter tripe. And here we are, right? Like it's just awful. Like I said at the start, I was so, it was such a weight, and it's not the despondent. It's not like misery at the Democrats losing, because they I'm not going to be waving if Harris had won. I'm not going to be waving a flag around and being like, yes, the dream's here. We've ended it all. We've beaten bad guys. Victory's ours. But the fact that political power now is in the hands of fascists, people who actively pose a threat to our environment, to our people, our planet, everything. Right? They're awful, and here we are, and that's just a bad time to be in. Right, it's just crap. And what are you meant to do? What's the? You got to keep on going, but it's a millstone around your neck. It's gutting, and especially when you've got it's not even there's no certainty of anything, right? It's just a big blank check with years and years of Trump. And you just got to see and wait for when the bad things happen, right? Because you just know as well that all these, scumbag right-wing accounts, they'll be saying stuff like, oh, well, Project 2025 is not going to happen because Trump's not said it yet, and look, it's day one, nothing's happened, and they're being intentionally obtuse because at any point, that administration will just drop their anti-trans bill. They'll take the Supreme Court. They'll take one of their cases to the Supreme Court to overturn, right? They'll have some moment where they decide to flick a switch and gut some environmental regulation. They'll decide one day that we found oil in Alaska and we've got to get rid of the protected Alaskan wilderness, or some Native American reservation is in the way of where a pipeline is going to go, so that's going to get bulldozed. At any point, this could happen. There's just a constant weaponization of miserable events celebrated by far-right people, by people who just actively hate any notion of fairness or decency, who are utterly right wing, and it's just terrible. It's a deliberate, intentional weaponization of decency against us, to make us feel bad and sad and let them win. And it's powerful because it works, right? Because people, I mean, you only have to look at, it's a horrible thing to have to say, right? But LGBTQ hotlines, suicide hotlines and stuff, were apparently, several percentiles, what am I saying percentiles? They were massively overused, right? Not overused. The lines were full. They were extremely busy, election night and since then, because it's just a fact, right? They're going to be one of the main targets of this administration. They want a conservative vision of society, cis heteronormativity. They don't believe LGBTQ people are part of that society. Some of them don't even believe they exist. They're awful. And so you've got this entire community of millions of Americans. Don't forget working class Americans. That's another disgusting thing they do. They claim they put out their lie that the working class are tired of Democrats. They want Republicans. They intentionally take the support, the lack of votes the Democrats got as some endorsement of their shitty anti-worker politics and views. They intentionally divide groups based on their identity, which is also part of why that person earlier was full of rubbish, right? Because the Republicans believe in the identities. The right believe in the identities that we have as dividing markers to separate us. So LGBTQ people, even as they work and even as they clearly economically belong in the same category as everyone else, as they just exist in society, they're separated out. They're treated as some detached identity, some ideology, and then they're targeted and attacked with legislation and physically, right? And so these people who are part of America and part of society are just facing attacks at random, be it from garbage from the government, be it from just general antipathy in society, and just from random attacks and random vitriol, right? Because when you have these people in office, there's an emboldened bigotry that a lot of people have. This comment here: the workers felt betrayed by both parties. Also, most working class people aren't white people. Well, to me, absolutely true. That there's a general discontent with politics in general, right? People are fed up because ultimately Democrats and Republicans both believe in free market capitalism. The issue is how much one believes in the other, right? Excuse me. And so, when the far right get to be in elections and stuff, and the Democrats are unwilling to really push. I can't speak. When they're willing to throw a few punches and say, actually, we're going to do some radical things. We're going to properly fund our public infrastructure, and we're going to actually tax billionaires so that we can fund, things for the masses. When they don't do that, they lose their own support, and they let the far right put in their insidious little, we're really for working class, we support you. Now, it's worth saying as well that working class people, it's not like some monolith. The fact that some working class people will fall into bigoted ideas is not some statement to say, well, working class people now support Trump. No, it's never as uniform and non-specific as that. The Democrats still, by the way, are better for lower income people than Republicans, by some distance. The cuts that are going to happen to education, public transport, public working sector, benefits, welfare state, all of that are going to be devastating. Healthcare, what's going to happen when they boot people off their Obamacare and stuff, right? When that's all cancelled, it's going to be devastating. People are going to die. There's nothing else to say about it, right? They're just going to be, there's nothing, it's crap. It's utter crap. And so it's insipid. And the second part, working class people aren't white people. Well, they're every race, gender, sexuality, disability. People in society come from all walks of life. And, it's it's reductive to suggest there's only one section to do it. The only reason, by the way, we like to, because the criticism that people are going to be of every section in society, the criticism that people, the left groups people into groups and stuff, like the only reason we do is because we want to break down the structures. I would love to live in a society, right, where people just are treated for who they are and just can live, there's a dream, right? For aliens to land and humans come out and we say, oh, I'm from Earth, I am a human being. The fact that we have to say that we're black and we're from certain nationalities and we're from certain sexualities and all of that essentially is because we live in a society with various bigotries and oppressions. And so we have to have these labels and identifiers to recognize those bigotries. Even whiteness, right? Whiteness being white isn't some like truth. It's not like a, ultimately the pigmentation of your skin is something that exists separately to the idea of being white because it changes over time. It's not like a fixed thing. Irish people, for instance, seen as the same level as dogs and black people and all the other, stuff that was said about them. And when black people started being a threat to white supremacy and to the norms of society, Irish people were given whiteness. It's not something which is like a universal truth. So white working class is like a thing to try and beat into people. Like it's just silly. It's not true. My voice is starting to get a bit hoarse, so I'm going to wrap this up in a second because I could rant and shout and stuff for some time, but I'm planning to have a few discussions with people and stuff. But I don't know. It's ridiculous. I'm so done and fed up with some of the stuff that's been sort of in discourse of late over the last few days. It's just ridiculous, and it's not good. Let me just respond to this quickly. Great content, Owen, just on your phone. But no, it's just nonsense. Like so much coverage given to these nonsense ideas that we have to like somehow win back people who ultimately were always going to vote for a fascist, because the fascism in a right-wing society, people susceptible to right-wing ideas are always going to fall into fascist tendencies eventually, right? And that's liberals as much as it is fascists. But like the people, we should be focusing on are the masses, the literal 200 million who did not vote. Like, how is that not the story? You've got yet another election where millions didn't have any interest in voting, who couldn't vote or were literally taken off the ballot list. That's another thing. In some of these states, they literally struck off thousands of voters right before the election. And then the Supreme Court blocked people from, blocked the various government agencies, Democrats and stuff, from actually doing anything about it. Absurd. And then it's just dropped before they don't even care. They don't even consider that as like a potential reason people didn't vote. Absurd. Absolutely absurd. Just utter garbage. I can't believe that even, fairly left-wing people are missing this. Like, the election was not held in fair circumstances. And just because Biden said things all went smoothly, it's not a smooth process that's good if it's one that doesn't, consider the fact that it's deeply unfair. It's just so dispiriting that a lot of people haven't used this moment and many moments before to say, actually, this system is fundamentally broken and unfair. And what can you do, right? That leads me, I suppose, the closing point, and what I want to talk about next time a little bit, potentially, is what we can do. As I said a minute ago, just like in before, when we thought about things in the past, every measure and act we can do to go a bit more left-wing, a bit more anti-right-wing, essentially, is at this point, anti-Trump, anti-Republican, anti-capitalist, anti-right-wing, anti-anything within that mode of thinking, is something, right? And I think there's a fear about what's going to come next, right? But one of the things that isn't going to come is going to come, even I'm losing my train of thought. One of the things that is going to come is going to be some dissent and upset. And that is what we've got to seize upon. We've got to make sure every moment the far right are in power is contested, be it on the streets, be it through policy, be it through dissent, be it through anything. It's got to be protested and stopped and fought against. And that takes civil disobedience, uncivil disobedience, any form of dissent. That's what it's got to be. My voice is going. I'm going to pause there, and we'll come back to this another time. But it's BS. I share your thoughts and sentiments. Just a farce, just disgusting, ridiculous.